Thanks all for coming. I'm Stefan Kieffer. I teach at the Faculty of Environmental Studies at York, and I'm also, among other things, with Free Transit Toronto, a group that indeed is in favor of free transit. Now, I assume that you are all familiar in various ways with the current transportation crisis in Toronto. Being stuck in traffic, being delayed on the subway, being delayed on the GO train, waiting for a bus that never comes in any suburb inside or outside of Toronto, and so on. And I also assume, and we also assume, that you have at least heard a few things about the current plan of Premier Ford to take the subway system out of the TDC and to upload it, as it were, to Metrolinx or another provincial authority. A number of panelists today will speak in part to campaigns against this provincial plan, which will become public in the next few weeks, we assume. So you'll hear lots about that particular issue that we're dealing with in Toronto today. Now, one may ask, what is at stake in this current uploading discussion? Now, listening to the mainstream debate, one could have the impression that the uploading discussion is all about jurisdiction, that it's all about which level of the state, which level of government gets to do what about transportation and transit, under what condition. So on one side we have figures on the so-called progressive side of Toronto City Council, people like Councillor Gord Perks, for whom it is a matter of principle to insist on municipal transit, on the idea that transit is best provided at the local level of the state. On the other side, we have organizations like the Toronto Region Board of Trade, an important exponent of the ruling class of Toronto, which in a report published in late 2017 proposed that the province create a new super-regional agency called Superlinx that would take control of all 11 municipal transit organizations in the GTA and in the Kitchener-Waterloo area. Ford, of course, is essentially cherry-picking an element of this Board of Trade plan, which goes much beyond what the province is going to propose, I assume. Of course, between these two positions, super-regional transit and local transit, we have various kinds of other positions. Now, jurisdiction matters, obviously, in various ways. But if you listen to the debate, such as it is, you do, when you scratch the surface, hear significantly different visions about transit, about transportation, indeed about the purpose of mobility and the nature of mobility in our region. For example, should transit and transportation be about a form of mobility that prioritizes the movement of goods and people across the whole region, 6, 7, 8, 9 million people, in order to boost the competitiveness of the Toronto area in the eyes of capital and the business community? This, of course, is the vision of the Toronto Board of Trade, it's the vision of the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, and it is surely also the vision of the current provincial government. On the other hand, we could ask, should transportation and transit prioritize ways of integrating public transit, cycling, pedestrian life from the ground up in order to reduce the kinds of frenzied commuter needs that we all have, and in order to shift mobility patterns away from the car and the truck? various transit advocates, and quite a few planners would be on that line. We can also ask, well, how can we shift this transformation in mobility patterns in order to advance equality, equity, and justice? How could one transform mobility patterns in order to make it possible for working class communities, people of color, and women to have real mobility choices and real access to public transit and other non-car oriented forms of transit and transportation? These are just three possible alternative visions one can think about. The next set of questions, of course, would force us to think about what the relationship may be between these various visions and the question of jurisdiction, the question of the relationship between different levels of the state. Is it possible to achieve, for example, an environmentally progressive, transit-oriented and socially just vision of mobility only at municipal scales, which sometimes people seem to think? Or is it possible to think of a environmentally and socially just, transit-oriented reform or radical agenda at a regional scale for the whole region of Toronto, or indeed at the level of the province and the nation state as a whole? Today we're going to try and address some of those questions by linking them in part to the current campaigns that are underway against provincial transportation and transit strategies. And we're trying to do that for a very simple reason. Many of us have been around for a while, and it's a sad affair to see that every few years people on the left and progressive side of things, on any issue, from transit to housing, from education to childcare, are again put on the defensive by the latest initiative coming on from high or less high, as it may be. And so in that context, I think we thought it would be important to not only talk about the campaign of resisting the next round of provincial initiatives, but also to refuse the idea that these initiatives should define the terms of debate, that these initiatives should force us to essentially accept the parameters of current policy discussion. So we're going to try and link the current political struggles to the question of what kind of transportation and transit and mobility we may want in the longer term. Now, with this much said, I will have 5 speakers, and we'll give each one of them 10 minutes. And I think I'm going to just introduce them in the order of speaking. So Daniel, you're going to go first? Sure. So Daniel Tseghay is going to start us off. He's with the GDC Riders and the Don't Steal Our Subway campaign. He's also one of the editors of rankandfile.ca, which you may want to check out. Not right now, but after the talk.
Thank you for that. First off, I want to thank the organizers for putting this together and for inviting me here to speak about something that I think we're all incredibly concerned about. I understand, I'm pretty sure that everyone here has heard about the province's plan to upload the subway. Just by a show of hands, I want to see how many of you here are incredibly upset about this plan. Yeah. Okay, so I'm glad that this is an echo chamber. You know, among many other things, one of the things we've been doing in TTC Riders is getting out there and canvassing at subway stations, doing door knocks, lit drops, calling a lot of people. And you know, there's, as you can imagine, there's a diversity of opinions on this. One thing that I think all of us, or nearly all of us, agree on is that transit needs to improve, right? I think we're all facing things like delays and overcrowding, and by the way, delays is not why, like subway delays is not why I was late. I was just late. But you know, that's something we all face, especially in rush hour and especially on certain parts of the city. So everyone's concerned about that. But what I have discovered talking with people while petitioning is that people either don't know about the plan at all, or if they do know about it, they're unsure why it's a problem, right? And this is not to mention the people who are very aware of what's going on and concerned about it for the same reasons that I think a lot of us here are. So why is this an issue? So number one, the province has been very open about its interest in pursuing public-private partnerships, which is basically giving over public land, public assets to private companies. In the case of transit, the idea is that in exchange for these development rights, those companies, private developers, would, they hope or they believe, would cover the costs of constructing new stations. Additionally, they argue that by creating these new stations, they're going to have a built-in ridership. Now, there are a few problems with this. Number one, plenty of experts have pointed out that in order for developers to even begin to cover the costs of this construction, they'd have to construct some of the largest private real estate projects in the country, like by a landslide, right? It's not feasible at all. Number two, even Metrolinx, the provincial transit agency that would likely oversee the subway if the province's plan succeeds, has admitted that because the real estate market is insecure and fluctuates a great deal, privatization would likely delay the construction of the transit we need. It just wouldn't provide the kind of funding that we need in a sustainable or committed and predictable way. Number three, part of privatization would mean the possibility of higher fares. Metrolinx, that provincial transit agency, has made it very clear that it's open to things like fare by speed. That means you pay a little bit more for faster transit like the subway, and fare by distance. So people who need public transportation, who need transportation the most, whether you're living in Etobicoke, Scarborough, wherever, they're going to be paying even more for their transit. So this is really concerning. You know, this shows us that not only are they it's unlikely that they're going to build the transit we need at all. Also very unlikely that they're going to build the transit we need as quickly as we need it, because we need it yesterday. And also the kind of transit that they're going to construct is not going to be affordable for the people who need it the most, right? Working class people. So, you know, big business and developers, they donated money to the PC party, so it shouldn't be a surprise that they'd want to go ahead with a plan that basically gives over public land and public assets to developers. But there is still something we can do. We can push back. What we're calling for is, you know, we note that the province used to contribute operating funding until Mike Harris cut it in 1998. Now the TTC is the least funded transit system in all of North America, which is incredible, it's shocking. So we believe, and I think we all agree, the solution isn't to break apart the system, to increase fares, to delay the construction of lines that we need. The solution is to fund it properly and keep it in the hands of people who actually live in the city. Isn't that right? What do you think? So, among other things, we've been focusing on the 11 PCMPPs in Toronto, canvassing in their ridings, speaking with constituents, and hoping that we can create a kind of groundswell that puts pressure on them to refrain from passing any legislation that any part of it includes, or that includes taking over any part of the subway. So we need to continue doing that. There's a petition in the back. It would be great if you signed the petition. Let me see by a show of hands, who here has signed the petition to stop the upload of the subway? Okay, those of you who have not, you should go to that petition. Just a few in the room. There are a couple clipboards. You should sign the petition. Put your contact info there so we can update you about things that are going on. It would be great if you can volunteer. There's a column there. You know, we need you out there to join us at subway campuses, subway blitz, We're doing lit drops, we're doing door knocking, we're doing a lot of things. We need people on board. So we're doing that. Another thing is recently a couple councillors moved a motion to launch a incredibly important public education campaign to let people know about what this plan would mean, right? The negative effects of this plan. Now, unfortunately, a majority of council voted to refer the item to executive committee, which will be on March 21st. So what we're doing is we're organizing a big rally. The meeting begins at 9:30. We're rallying at 9 a.m. Draw attention to this, bring people to the meeting, have people depute at the meeting itself, and just raise awareness that we need people on the executive committee to move ahead with a public education campaign to let people know about this. So Herman here has a pile of little flyers that has some info.
Take some, pass it around here.
Yeah.
We'll do it on the other side too here. Sorry.
Yeah. So it's got some info about that rally and about a couple other events that we have coming up. Another thing is, as you can see on it, well, those of you who have it already, there is a phone number. It would be great if you texted that phone number saying our TTC and follow the prompts. What that will do is it will give us your contact info basically, and we can let you know about events that are coming up and about volunteer opportunities. Because we need to ramp up this campaign. You know, we don't know exactly when or if anything will happen, if legislation will be proposed, but if it does, it could happen at any time. I mean, I don't think I'm alone in noticing that Ford doesn't really announce things ahead of time. Things just kind of happen suddenly. So we're preparing and we're trying to continue to put the public pressure on this province and let them know that the subway needs to remain in the hands of the city, that we need to properly fund it, and we need to build good transit for all people in this city in a timely fashion. Thank you.
Next we'll have Deborah Litman, who's an organizer with the Keep Transit public campaign for the Amalgamated Transit Union, the union of transit workers in the TDC.
Hello, and again, thank you to the organizers for putting this together. I'm Deborah Litman, and I'm working for the Amalgamated Transit Union Local 113, which is the union that represents the workers that actually run the TTC. There are 11,500 of them, and they do every possible job, from station janitors to bus drivers to streetcar drivers to the people that maintain and actually build many of those vehicles almost from the ground up. They do the fare collection, such as it is. I'll come back and talk about that in a minute. And virtually every job in the TTC. So obviously the union has an incredibly strong stake, deep stake, historic stake in wanting the TTC to remain in the hands of the City of Toronto and to be well funded and to be well run. It's a frustration on the part of most of our members that they are unable to provide the service that they would like to. It's heartbreaking sometimes. I had a bus driver the other day say, I have to pass people up on my bus. It breaks my heart. And I think that that's really an important thing to understand, that it's not that the staff are sitting there going, oh, sure, leave them behind, who cares? Often it's tremendous pressure in terms of scheduling and timing, and they are really trying to do their absolute best. So when we look at the interest in how we plan transit, so we're talking about how do we envision the transit we want, we certainly want transit that they don't have to make those kinds of decisions. Do I stay on schedule, or do I have to pass that person up? Can I get the woman on with the stroller at the same time as the person with the wheelchair? Those are not decisions you want them to have to make. But essentially, where we can envision the kind of transit that is evidence-based. What do we really need? Who needs what? Where should it go? How often should it run? And what serves the needs of the vast majority of people? Unfortunately, that's not how transit gets planned. And I'm sure that our colleagues here will talk more about the planning of transit, but basically, like all other public services, there are the same political pressures. So pressure to cut costs, pressure to bust unions, pressure to privatize services, and in the case of transit, pressure of cars over transit, prioritizing cars over transit. One of the reasons why Doug Ford loves subways so much is they don't get in the way of cars. Right? So it's not so much that he thinks subways are so great. I bet he doesn't ride them, but he wants no barrier for his $50,000 van, you know, with the swivel seats and all of that. We also have some real class and racial issues around transit. I experience it, much more extremely when we go down and visit locals in the United States, where you literally have situations where there is no transit serving a black neighborhood, or there is no transit in a working class neighborhood after 5, and people have to walk miles to get to their jobs. So in cities like that, the connection between class, race, and transit is a lot more overt than it is in Toronto. But on the other hand, we can also make those connections here. What are the areas that are underserved? What are the areas that actually get the transit they need? You know, those are decisions that are very political. So we're a long way from getting the kind of transit that would really serve the interests of the vast majority of people in the community, and that would be accountable to the community. ATU has 30,000 members across the whole country, so we have many of these same struggles in other cities. And we're dedicated to, as a union, keeping transit public and in local hands, and so that it's accountable. So our campaign, Keep Transit Public, has been going on for several years. It started in Hamilton, and it was originally focused on trying to respond to the outsourcing of maintenance contracts for LRTs. So it started with Hamilton. The province, previous provincial government, said, here's what you're going to get. You're going to get an LRT, and we might let the union drive it, but we're certainly not going to let it maintain it. So you have to understand that there's a real business thing here. A company like Bombardier provides the cars and then makes most of its money off maintaining them for 30 years. Right? So the outsourcing of maintenance is a really serious issue. And it's something that you should really worry about, because when you're riding that streetcar or that subway or that bus, it's now being maintained by people who really know their job, that have a vast background, cumulative history, skill set, training, oversight in terms of maintaining those kinds of vehicles. When you get it contracted out, you don't know who you've got fixing that vehicle. It's somebody just got hired off the auto shop, that knows how to turn a wrench, but, hasn't seen a rail car in his life. That's really ultimately what happens. And just as an example, so Bombardier, you know the story of Bombardier on the streetcars? A little bit. So Bombardier had contracts to deliver streetcars, and they were really slow delivering them. They barely delivered the number they were required to do, and they came wrong. The welds were all wrong, because they ordered one part of them from Europe and another part from Mexico. And when they put them together in Thunder Bay, they found that they didn't quite fit. They had to send them all back to be re-welded. Do you really want to ride on a streetcar that's been welded by people that can't figure out how to put two welds together? There are all kinds of design problems. The new streetcars, for example, have, and I don't know if you've noticed this, they don't have a movable truck in the middle. Right? So the old streetcars do, and that's why they swivel so nicely around a corner. Double the size, they don't have movable trucks. So when they turn, the back goes way out in the back, and they have to go very slowly, because otherwise they'll derail. Sharp, smart, really, really clever. The wiper box is open. Have a look at your car. Is your wiper box open? So leaves fall in and, dirt falls in. No, it's closed.
The wiper?
So the wiper box, where
See,
the
underneath the
wipers
wiper
come
box.
out,
Right.
they're closed, so that, dirt can't get in. No, on the new street cars, the wiper box is open. So there's constant maintenance going to be needed once they're out there. So these are things that, I'm not telling you this to scare you, but it's an indication of the level of thoughtfulness, design, etc., that is coming from the private company that now has the contract for 30 years to maintain Eglinton Crosstown. So our original campaign was around saying, no, maintenance needs to stay in-house. We need to get it back in-house for that contract, and for all the other LRTs, we need to keep it in-house. Well, that was where we started. Now we're dealing with this upload, which is even worse, okay? We're going to actually take a highly integrated system where all those pieces, streetcar, bus, subway, fit together, where staff often are working across all of those services, where the skill set of all those people have been integrated, and break it up so that one group works for one entity and another group works for another. Now, just to give you an example, you remember the snowstorm a couple of weeks ago, the huge snowstorm. So during that snowstorm, there were people that were stationed, that were maintenance people, that spent the night digging out buses so that at least some of them could get out of the yard. That wasn't their job. They're not janitors. They're not, they're not people that do, but because they all work for the same system, everybody pushed together to make sure that that worked. Every single person in the TTC that has any relationship to a subway gets emergency training. So whether it's a janitor on a station, whether it's a bus driver driving into a station, whether it's a station collector, whether anybody who has any relationship to subway gets emergency training so that they can cut power at track level and evacuate people. Now what's going to happen if they're all working for different entities, right? And one goes, no, that's not my job. No, sorry, that's not my job, right? These are things that most people don't know. And one of the things that we've been doing is our members do know this, and they've been going, and we've been meeting with politicians, we've been trying to say, look, don't get confused here. You are going to be taking on a huge poison chalice, because if you think that you're going to take this over and it's going to work, and then it's going to have a disastrous impact and you're going to wear it. We're trying to scare them, On top of that, the TTC brought out a report that said that they need, see if I can get the number right.
33 billion.
How much in maintenance? 16.
16.
$16.5 billion over the next 15 years in maintenance, just to keep the system running at its current level and a mild expansion. No new lines, nothing, right? And this is a province that wants to cut its deficit. Where's that money going to come from, right? So if they don't do that, if they say, yeah, we'll take it over, but actually we're not going to really put all that money in for maintenance, you'll get a New York. Okay, right now, the city of New York is in absolute crisis mode because their state, which owns their subway, has not put in the money that was needed for that, for state of good repair all this time, and now they're talking about closing whole lines for a year at a time in order to do the work they need to do. So these are things that have a direct impact on you, on the community, and so I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes about how do we get that information out there and how do we fight on the campaign. First of all, we have to actually flip the thing around a little bit. As you said, we're on the defensive all the time. We're constantly on the defensive. We're responding to. We need our own vision of what kind of transit system we want, but we also need to stop talking to ourselves. We do really exist in an echo chamber. We tend to talk to the people we already know, and people go to meetings and they go, yeah, and they leave. And this isn't just about transit. It's about everything. We're really under assault in so many different ways. We have to go out to those organizations that have lots of people and potentially lots of power but aren't advocacy groups and aren't campaigning groups? How many people here belong to something? Okay, give me an example. What do you belong to? Club, faith organization? What?
Gym, like good, I go to a gym.
Yeah, I go to a gym. I belong
20
to a
people I talk to all
choir.
the time.
What else? BCC? Yeah. Yeah.
Constantly arguing.
Yeah. Listen.
Dance club.
Yeah. Civil society. Those organizations that actually, where people just go because they have something in common, they want to do something. Your kid's school, the social club, the sports club, whatever it is. Those organizations have lots of people that come together for a different purpose. I mean, whatever, to dance, to sing, to do whatever they do, but they're organized already. One of our problems is we do tend to do a lot of catching individuals, and we catch them on their way to here or there, and yeah, that helps, but those institutions that are actually organized, that have an interest, that may have an interest. Now, they may not think of themselves as transit advocates, but I can't get the kids to practice on time because the transit's running so slowly. I'm finding that the enrollment's down in my dance club because people are worried about leaving late and what the transit's like on the way home. Those are things that actually affect lots of people. So what we have to do is start going out into those institutions and asking people, how does transit affect you? What are you prepared to do? Okay, with our own union, we've actually done this. And I'm in, this is Ford, bulldozing over all of us, steamrolling rather, and then asking our members, what are you prepared to do? Right? Having the choices, having them come in. So we're actually then following them up and saying, right, you said you were willing to do da-da-da. Would you be willing to come out? We're meeting your counselor next week. Would you join us? Right? And I think that if we start to do that, if we start to build the strength of these common institutions, and they may not agree on everything, but if we can say, okay, let's figure out the area around this campaign that we do agree on, then not only will we strengthen our campaign around transit, but ultimately there'll be other issues. And if those organizations are already working together around this, they start to make those connections and build those relationships, then they may also want to talk about their kids' education and the healthcare system. So start to think a little bit differently, start to think institutionally in terms of those organizations that could really be part of this campaign if we reached out and talked to them. And then let's pay attention to the TTC riders and the campaign, and please, please, please take part. Thanks.